Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mariah and I talk about books on my channel. If you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. I know last week I said I was at 30 subscribers and that I was super psyched, and now I'm at 40 and I have been for a couple of days now, so I can't thank you guys enough for doing everything that you guys have done. If you notice, we're in a different filming location. This is this is going to be my library slash studio slash craft room. And these are the two shelves that I'm using for all the books that I've read. So as I go through this video, you'll get to see me put things away. And I forgot something. I'll be right back. Alright, and today I am drinking out of my Swedish cat charity mug that a friend of mine brought back from Sweden. Coffee today, guys. So let's go through the books that I've read, and I'm going to go through them chronologically and give you my star ratings as I go along. For me, the 3 is not a bad score. It's an average book. Nothing really amazing, nothing really horrible. It's just kind of there. A 4-star book is a great book. Like, there was nothing really wrong with it. It just wasn't outstanding. I'm very stingy with my 5 stars normally. A 1-star book is, 1 and 2 stars. 2 is 1 is, yeah, I didn't enjoy this at all. And when I DNF a book, I don't really give it a star rating. Just because I didn't finish it, and I don't think that's fair. So, starting at the beginning of the month, I've already talked about these in my May wrap-up, but they are the March trilogy, March Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3 by John Lewis. They are a graphic memoir about John Lewis's time as a civil rights worker, and he's now a representative, I think, in the House of Representatives, and it was very touching and very moving. If you want my more in-depth thoughts, I'll link the May wrap-up in the cards. Next I read In Harm's Way by Doug Stanton. This is a nonfiction, and it tells the story of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis and the story of her survivors. The USS Indianapolis was a cruiser in World War II that was sunk by a Japanese torpedo on its way back from a secret mission. Due to some miscommunications, nobody knew exactly where she was or where she was supposed to be, so she wasn't reported missing in a timely manner. And because of the initial torpedo, the sinking of the ship, and then shark attacks, dehydration, illness, and wounds, only 317 men of the 1,200 men aboard survived. So this book made me cry. It was well told. I was really engaged in the story itself. It's really sad. It is a really sad book, but it's wonderfully told. It's wonderfully written. Captain McVeigh, who was the skipper of the ship, did not deserve what he got, and it was really touching to see what his boys tried to do for him and managed to accomplish. So this tells the story leading up to the incident that sunk the Indianapolis, the sinking of the Indianapolis, as well as some of the stories from the survivors when they got home and such. This was an excellent book. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I finished it around the 13th. Next I read another nonfiction, Make Your Bed. It's by Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World by Admiral William H. McRaven, U.S. Navy, retired. This was originally a speech that he gave at the University of Texas. Yeah, the University of Texas at Austin in 2014 that he then expounded upon. So each chapter, it's a very, very short book. Each chapter focuses on one of the points that he makes in the speech, as well as stories from himself, from his life and from other people in his life, and how to give an example of how to apply those. So start your day with a task completed. You can't go it alone. Only the size of your heart matters. Life's not fair. Drive on. Failure can make you stronger. You must dare greatly. Stand up to the bullies. Rise to the occasion. Give people hope and never ever quit. Are the chapter names. It was a super quick read. This has less than 200 pages. It has 125 pages. I breezed through this. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was still very inspirational and motivational, and it definitely has earned its place on my shelf. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read another nonfiction, and another Navy nonfiction, and that's Blind Man's Bluff, The Untold Story of American Submarine Espionage by Sherry Sontag and Christopher Drew. This is a big book, but it was really, really fascinating to read. If you like spy stories, if you like Cold War stories, this is definitely a book for you, especially if you like reading the spycraft that went on during that time. I learned a lot from this book, and it was also very sad. I cried in this book too. Maybe I should stop reading books where people die and families at home are waiting for them. Anyways, this was a great book. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. And so I mentioned in my June TBR that I needed to replace this copy, and I have. It's on this shelf somewhere. So this is the new copy. I actually like this copy a lot better. It's bigger. It looks less intimidating. But I read my boyfriend's copy, so that was my gift to him, was replacing that. My gift to him was replacing that copy. Like I said, this is my nonfiction shelf, this is my fiction shelf. Next I read The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. This wasn't originally on my TBR. If you had watched my TBR for June, you know that I pulled the card, read a book that was published the decade you were born. I was born in the 90s, the early 90s. And I wanted to continue the Witcher series. So I had the second book, and I opened it, and I was super excited to read it, and I had no idea what was going on because I read the first book over 2 years ago. So I really need to reread what had happened because the second book picks up right where the first book left off. I'm hoping I'll enjoy it as much this time around. I really don't remember much about it, which is kind of troublesome for me. There was another book that I haven't read in a long time, but is on my shelves that I want to continue the series, is Brent Weeks' The Way of Shadows from the Night, which is the first book in the Night Angel trilogy, and that was, but I can remember a lot about that book. And I remember how dark it was, and I know that I have to prepare myself for the coming books, but so to replace that, the second Witcher book, I think it's The Last Wish, I picked up The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. I was really, really lucky, and I found a first edition cover. These are now out of print. They're super hard to find, and I got this for $25 at my local bookstore. And it was so good. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Now, if you watched my I think it's my Rep Rush 50 bookish questions video, which I'll link in the tag or in the cards. I am obsessed with another series by Clive Barker called Abrat. These are young adult novels that are centered on a girl named Candy Quackenbush. I'm obsessed with them. I probably love them more than I love Harry Potter or Artemis Fowl or even Redwall. Those books were my childhood, and I had to wait years between them, which is pretty devastating because I've been waiting for the fourth book since, 2014. Please, Clive Barker. I know you don't watch my videos, but I know you don't watch my videos, but if the fourth book could come out, I would literally cry and buy it immediately. So, with that in mind, I picked up this book a while ago, and I just hadn't gotten around to reading it yet. I love Clive Barker's style of writing. I love the fact that all of his books are illustrated, and they're illustrated in a very unique way. Now, Clive Barker's illustrations are not for the faint of heart. He does not pull punches. He has a very odd art style. I personally love it. He also has a very odd writing style, which again, I really connect with for some reason. But The Thief of Always tells the story of a young boy named Harvey who is very bored. And being very bored, he accepts an invitation to a place called the Hill House. Now, the Hill House has a few other young inhabitants, and every day has every season and every holiday. But Harvey has a feeling that something isn't quite right, and he can't shake this lingering doubt. This is a children's book, and for a children's book, it's very dark. It's very dark. It tackles some really big themes. I loved this. I loved the book. I loved every second of it. I loved the illustrations. I love how, even though it's a very simplistic writing style because it is for children, it was still engaging, and that the characters were really engaging. Did it have a lot of character growth? No. But did it have a lot of good messages? Yes. I highly recommend this book. If you haven't read any of the other Clive Barker's other books, this or the Abrat, please just pick up one of his books. They're great. They're some of my all-time favorite, and I can't wait to put this back up on my collectible shelf where it belongs. Next I read Muhammad by Martin Lings. This is a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and how the Quran was passed to him, and how and his life story, as well as leading up to the designation of Abu Bakr as his successor. If you don't know anything about Islam, none of that made sense. This was very interesting because it read like a holy text. Now, Martin Lings is not Muslim. He was an Orientalist that worked for, I think, Oxford. So he was an Orientalist who worked for Oxford, or who went to Oxford, worked with C.S. Lewis, worked at the University of Cairo when Egypt was still under the British Mandate, an Orientalist in this case does not mean somebody who likes Far East Asia. In this case, an Orientalist is somebody who was focused on the Middle East. That was they were known as Orientalists, and many of them, Gertrude Bell, Agatha Christie's husband, I don't remember his name, Agatha Christie's second husband, they were all Orientalists, Egyptologists, all of that. Now, with that in mind, this was not meant to be a scholarly look at the Prophet's life. This was meant to be taking a bunch of sources, the hadiths, the Quran, the folklore surrounding him, various other biographies written by, in the subsequent years by Arab scholars, translated and distilled down into a biography. with that in mind, I thought this was going to be more of a more scholarly approach to that, so it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I also didn't realize that Martin Langs was an Orientalist from Oxford, and I really want to pick up something about Islam that was written either in modern day with a look at the culture, or or preferably written by a Muslim, or at least somebody who has lived in the Middle East and is from the Middle East. For instance, I know that Iraq and Egypt and Syria and Lebanon all have Christian populations. I really want something about that region from somebody within that region. And so this only got 3 stars. I don't know if I'm going to be keeping it. It was interesting, but it was not what I had hoped for out of it. This goes back to own voices and why it's so important to have that own voices discourse, not only in the fiction community, but also in the non-fiction community as well. The next book I read, or rather I DNF'd, was A Darkness Forged in Fire by Chris Evans. I was really excited about this because I remember really liking it when I was younger. I was 14 when I last picked up this book, roughly. Between 14 and 16. And reading it now, I wasn't a huge fan. The ideas were there. The concept, the world building was there. However, the main character, who in this case, Kanawa Swiftdragon, just didn't do it for me, and neither did any of the sub-characters. The idea behind A Darkness Forged in Fire is that there's a shadow monarch, an elvish witch queen of sorts, who lives across the sea from this large empire, who marks certain elves from a place called the Henta with a dark mark on their ear, and to try to prevent that from spreading, their ears are chopped. Like, the tip of their ear is chopped off, and many of them go to join the army, the Empress's army, in the capital, and was part of a group called the Iron Elves. Now, their commander was Kanawa Swiftdragon, who committed this horrible crime, and was removed from power, and his regiment disbanded because of it. Now, I was super excited about the world building because you're introduced to this large empire with a vast number of people and cultures, and you're introduced to one kind of each, and it just doesn't make sense. All of the side characters are very flat. Kanawa Swiftdragon is the only one who has like these complex emotions and feelings. The romance didn't interest me at all. I was about half the way through this when I just DNF'd it. I couldn't continue. There are certain breaks in the writing style that jar you out of the fantasy world, because it's just too reminiscent of our world, if that makes any sense, or the concepts don't fit into that world and the metaphors don't make sense in that world. This is a generic fantasy. It's not awful, it's not great, it just didn't appeal to me after a while, and so I put it down. So I DNF'd this one, and I won't be keeping it. Next I read Stamped from the Beginning by Abram X. Kendi. He is a historian and a PhD holder. This was a history of racist thought in America, and I gave this book 4 to 5 stars. It was a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it, especially for what it was, which was a hard-hitting history. And it's illustrated through a number of examples and a number of figures how persuasive and pervasive racist thought is, and the idea of the white savior, and the idea of assimilation versus segregation, and anti-racism versus racism, and it tackled a lot of these very complex issues through a historical standpoint. I really enjoyed this book. It was hard for me to read because a lot of the people that I was taught about in school were put in a less than amazing light in this book, because you can't ignore what this was like back in the day, or what motives might have been behind all of these so-called moves forward, and that's hard to swallow. Not hard to swallow, that's not the word. That's hard. There's a, what is it, cognitive dysphoria? There's an idea in neuro and psychology where you're so shocked out of your belief system that your brain can't quite catch on to what's going on, even if it's right in front of your face. I can't remember what that is. I'll put it down below if I can remember. But that's what this book did to me. It kind of shocked me into realizing, into seeing racism where I thought there weren't any, where I thought it was like an algorithm, or I thought it was a standardized test that everybody had a fair chance on. And it's not the case. I highly recommend it. It was a great start to my education on the issue, and I really hope to read more books by Dr. Kindy. I finished Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levine on audiobook. I give this 3 stars. It's a pretty run-of-the-mill Satanism scare. I really enjoyed the movie when that came out. The audiobook was narrated by Mia Farrow, who played Rosemary in the movie. It's a classic horror movie. It's a classic horror novel. Didn't quite do it for me. It's definitely a product of the Satanism scare from that time frame, and I think it really shows a lack of understanding of Wicca because it was written when that was becoming more and more mainstream. And overall, it was good. It wasn't great. I kind of thought Rosemary she doubted herself a lot, and she doubted her own gut a lot, and that really bothered me. And her husband was an asshole, and she ignored the advice of all of her friends, which kind of bugged me. I'm trying to do this without any spoilers because there are very specific examples that I could use that I don't want to use. If you're looking for a fun horror novel, pick up Rosemary's Baby. If you're looking for something with the world building and the scariness of, say, Joe Hill's work or Stephen King's work, this might not be for you. Finally, I picked up, I finished literally at the last minute. I had an hour left on June 30th when I finished this book. And that was The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I gave this 3.75 out of 5 stars. It was definitely a first novel in a series, and you can definitely tell that it was building up towards that series. It picked up towards the end, but the first bit, it was so slow. I'm back. If you notice, my hair is different, and like I'm wearing more jewelry and stuff. It's because my camera died while I was filming. So I don't know where I was. The Eye of the World is the first book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson finished up the last few books after Robert Jordan died, tragically, or unexpectedly. So this is a story about Rand, Matt, and Perrin, and Egwene. They're villagers from a village known as Emmonsfield. And Emmonsfield is a very small village. It's in a section of the world known as the Two Rivers. And they're supposed to be, like, very stubborn people. And the village is attacked by Trollocs. And the 4 main characters go off with the Aes Sedai Moraine and her warder Lan, who are magic user, or Moraine is a magic user from city Tar Valon, which only women can use magic in this world, or are only supposed to use magic because the male side of the magic has been corrupted. I give this book 3.75 out of 5 stars for a number of reasons. First, I really, really enjoyed the world, and I loved the writing style, and I loved how compelling it was. I wanted to keep reading the story for the writing, for the world, and for all of these details that are brought together, and like the overall plot was fantastic. The characters gave me ulcers. Rand, Matt, Perrin, and Egwene are all very prejudiced in their outlook on the rest of the world, and I guess that was somewhat intentional because they're supposed to be from this very small village, but they're even prejudiced against people who are helping them. Rand can be overly possessive of Egwene. Matt is an idiot. He's just an idiot. I did not like his character at all. Perrin is the only one who seemed to have a lick of sense about him, and even then he still seems somewhat disconnected from the world around him, and I felt like that really took away from the overall message and the build-up that was going on in this book. That isn't to say that Moraine or Lan or another character, Nynaeve, were any better. Nynaeve is just awful the entire time. Not like she's awfully written, it's just she acted very poorly towards certain characters. Moraine is very black and white. It's either you do or you don't, and that's just that. Lan just follows what Moraine says because he's sworn to. There were a ton of characters in this book. It was masterfully written. I want to continue with the series. I just might not buy the rest of the series until I know I'm going to love it, just because this was a very, very hard book for me to keep going back to because I didn't like the main characters that much. With that being said, it's not a bad book at all if you like big books. This was 782 pages, so if you liked big books and you want to read an epic fantasy series, this would be a good one. This is one of my dad's favorite series, and he was the one who recommended it to me. And then I told him my complex feelings. He was like, yeah, you're going to feel like that for the rest of the series, so I'll probably check these out or try to get them on audiobook for the next time. So that wraps up all 12 books I read in the month of June. Overall, it was a pretty good reading month. Only 1 DNF out of the 12 books that I read. I read all of my books for from my TBRnium. It's like 3 hours later. That's the beer instead of coffee. But overall, only 1 DNF. Everything was a 3-star or higher book. I had 2 5 stars, which for me is a great reading month. Like, that's fantastic. Especially with everything going on. I'm a college student as well as working full-time in a very demanding job. And in the process of moving from my house to this house, and I just got engaged and we're trying to plan a wedding, and it's been a very tumultuous month, and I know that's the case for a lot of people. So if you're interested in what I'm reading in the month of July and you haven't already checked out my TBRnium video, please do. I'll leave that linked either below or in the cards. I'll link it somewhere. And I highly recommend you check out some of these books. They're fantastic. I was really pleased with the amount of enjoyment I got out of this month. And let's get on to putting everything away. So I'm going to start. You're going to be able to see that. These are the shelves that they go on. I'll break it down for you guys. So up top we have some of my board games and puzzles. That's a fantasy shelf, alphabetically by author. That's a fantasy shelf all the way until right there, Nosferatu by Joe Hill. And then it goes, that's the one horror book I have on this shelf, onto sci-fi, and then onto thrillers / contemporaries. This shelf down below is my anthologies and short story collections, all the way to there. Poetry, starting from here over. Comic books and manga and graphic novels are all right here, plus my book sleeves. That's my nonfiction shelf, so history, biographies, military history, Middle Eastern history, and religions, and language books, magazines, mythology, and all sorts of other stuff. So let's put you guys back so you guys can see me putting away these shelves. This wraps up the month of June's wrap up. Thank you guys for tagging along. Let me know how you like the new setup. It's a work in progress. The idea is as I finish books, I can film here and immediately put them away, so there's not piles. And this, eventually, I'll give you guys a room tour once this is all set up. I really hope you guys enjoyed this, and that you guys have a great month of July and a great reading month. If you're interested, I was drinking a vanilla nut flavored coffee earlier from my local brewery, and this is a lemon saison that my fiance made. So with that in mind, I will see you guys next week. All the best coffee, wine, and books to you. Cheers.